hadn't been weeded for about a year. Just this shocking weed that I rolled back like a great carpet and got it out of the way. And then I composted the area, and the day came when finally I was standing out there with all these 8 or 9 little packets of seeds in this weeded patch, and I didn't have my glasses because I sweat when I garden and they fall off. And so without my glasses, I couldn't read the tiny little labels. And I thought, oh, I was all dirty. If I have to get all cleaned up and go back in the house, it's annoying. And then I thought, well, I don't want to plant a formal garden anyway with things in rows. This garden will just be wild and free. I will just scatter all these seeds around and there'll be beautiful drifts of colour and it will just be great. It seemed like a good idea at the time. So I scattered all these seeds around, and within a few weeks all these shoots came up. And because I had no idea what I had planted, I had no idea which of the shoots were flowers and which ones were weeds. And they grew, and I was afraid to weed them. Not that I'm the greatest weeder in the world, but I was afraid to weed them because I'll be pulling out all the flowers. And they grew, and they grew, and they grew. In the end, the only thing that survived the competition with the weeds was these everlasting daisies. They came up, they were good. Everything else, the weeds just choked them out. I also got some tomatoes, but I know where they came from. They came out of the compost. We eat tomatoes, and so there were tomato seeds. So I got everlasting daisies and tomatoes. I didn't get any corn. We don't eat corn. There was no corn in our compost. Didn't plant any corn, so we didn't get any corn. Because in the title of today's sermon, you reap what you sow. The title is You Reap What You Sow, and the subtitle is Do Not Be Deceived. And that part comes straight out of the verse that is the basis for today's sermon from Galatians 6, verse 7. And it says, Do not be deceived, God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. And I want to talk about 4 elements of this: reaping corn, reaping later, reaping the whirlwind, and reaping life. Reaping corn. Well, all over the world, in lots of different cultures, this sort of wisdom, this reaping and harvesting wisdom is found. There's a saying in China that says, reap corn, harvest corn. Korea has one that says, reap kindness, harvest love. Or is it friendship? I think it's reap kindness, harvest friendship. That's nice. When computers came out, you might remember this one. Garbage in, garbage out. There you go. Another one you hear around says, what goes around comes around. It's familiar to us, isn't it? And that one is a little bit like the idea of karma, that there's this vague, universal principle of balance, that if you put out kindness into the universe, that's what will come back to you, and if you put out bad things, that's what will come back to you. But the verse we're looking at isn't about a vague, universal principle. It says, God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. And it starts off with this phrase about being deceived. What's that bit about? Well, if you want to understand a culture, one of the places you look at is their art, their poems and songs and stories, their movies, because that's where we tell other people what we really value. That's where we tell other people how to belong to the culture, how to be a good person, how to be a child in the culture, how to be an adult, how to be a parent, how to have a good family. Those things are there in our culture. And in the last, say, 20 years or so, there's a theme that's coming out in movies and stories in our culture. And the theme is, if it feels good, do it. If it's a feeling that you have, if it's an impulse that you have, you should follow it. You should do as you please. You should resist people who try to suppress you or control you. You should be wild and free. You should follow your heart. If you have appetites, you should indulge them. There's a song that says, the heart wants what the heart wants. It just makes me crazy, that song. And there's this phrase that's sort of an umbrella that says, be true to yourself. If this is what you want, if this is what you feel, you should be true to yourself. And so you get people that what they want is intimacy without the demands of commitment or faithfulness. What people want is to be indulge their greed without harming their integrity. This is a consumer culture, and people want to have and buy and own without feeling like that damages their integrity. You get people who want to indulge in vanity without thinking they deform their character through selfishness. You get people who want to do things like use porn and feel like that causes no abuse in the society or in their relationships. You get thieves in our movies who are heroes. How many movies where the heroes are thieves and ratbags, where good is evil? And technology kicks in here because in a way that previous generations didn't have, we now have a technology that alters relationships. It alters the way people communicate with one another. It can even, medical technology can alter people's appearance. Even the sacred gifts that God gives every person at birth, their identity, their gender, their race, their shape. God gives those things to each of us, and medical technology means we can play around with that. And the key question in deciding whether or not a person will go ahead with those sort of changes features this word want. Do you want this? Is this what you really want? Will you still want this in 20 years' time? You know, how much do you want this? As though that was the main criteria. One of the sayings I hear in Australia is, no harm, no foul. If I do something and I didn't harm anyone else, there's no foul. It's not a sin, it's not a problem, I can do whatever I like. And we're talking about sowing without any reaping. Sowing without living with any unpleasant consequences of what we do. And in defiance of that theory, in defiance of that theme in our movies and stories, the Bible is clear. The link between what you sow and what you reap, the Bible tells us, is a profound and unswerving principle of human life. You will reap what you sow. Do not be deceived by the messages of your culture that say, you can sow whatever you like and it'll all be okay. And if you have a look at the Bible from the beginning to the end, there are stories about reaping and sowing. There's Adam in a garden who sowed a disobedience to one command and reaped literally a difficult harvest. In the sweat of your brow, you will toil for the plants that you want to grow. And he wasn't the only one. Noah lived among a people where everyone did whatever was right in their own eyes, and they reaped a terrible harvest from that. Moses leading the people of Israel who were afraid of God and didn't want to see him, but not so afraid they wouldn't complain about everything they didn't like. And they reaped a harvest of a 40-year delay until a generation had gone. David, who saw a woman and lusted after someone else's wife, and his behaviour reaped a harvest of an unplanned pregnancy, the murder of a friend, and a baby who died. Jesus talks about reaping and sowing. He says the fields are white unto harvest. Pray, therefore, the Lord of the harvest to send out labourers into the fields. And Revelation, God says to an angel, take up your sickle and reap, because the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. From beginning to end, the Bible narratives brim with stories of sowing and reaping. I'm old. I know I'm old now. I am. And I can remember a bunch of things when I was growing up that in the culture of my time were really clearly bad. They were just bad things. Everybody knew they were bad. Everybody worked against them. Studies were made to compare if the figures were going up or down. Teen pregnancy was a bad thing. That was bad. Broken homes. Places where children were parented by a single parent. That was bad. That was bad for the parent. It was hard on them. It was bad for the kids. It was bad. Using a lot of alcohol was bad. It was very bad for young people. It shouldn't happen at all. It was illegal. Young people shouldn't be using a terrifically large amount of alcohol. STDs were bad. Confusion about your gender was bad. Shoplifting, that was bad. Shouldn't do that. Abortion is bad. Telling lies, that's bad. Making bets, that's really not a good thing. That's a bad thing. Binging, watching too much TV, that's bad. Shouldn't watch too much TV. Being in debt, that's bad. Watch television. And our TV doesn't work, but every now and then we see this streaming from a TV station, and you see so many ads. There's a thing called Nimble where they will get your pay before you get paid. You can spend it before you have it, before you earn it. It's like a mini debt that you can have every week. There's ads for it like it's a really good thing. Just nibble it and move on. I hate that. There's ads for binging things on TV. Go right ahead. You just sit there and forget your other responsibilities. You just watch it for hours. This would be a great series to binge. You could binge watch this. Betting. Wow! They didn't used to advertise betting. They have a sentence at the end that says, gamble responsibly. None of them seriously think that anybody who hears that gamble responsibly is going to curb their betting, especially if you have an addictive behaviour around betting. Nobody thinks that. Shoplifting, shops now know that shoplifting is so severe, there's so much of it, there's a portion of their profit that has to be there to cope with the amount of shoplifting that happens. And it isn't that our culture is saying those things are good things, but they're normalised. They're just normal. They're just really ordinary. They're as ordinary as. And we're standing in a garden, and we have planted them, and they're there, and we have no clue what's coming up. And one of the reasons that people, particularly younger people, don't make the connection between what they plant and what they will reap is because the reaping often happens quite a bit later. There's a delay, there's a lag. It's a bit like hire purchase. Pay now, buy now, pay later. And these days they say, enjoy now. 12 months free. I was reading about a pilot. He's American, so the measurements he gives us are in miles, so forgive us with that. But he said, if you set your course and you're just 1 degree off, for every 60 miles you travel, you'll miss your destination by 1 mile. Travel 60 miles, you're 1 mile away. And if you're up in the air and you're a mile away, you look and go, oh, the airport's over there. And you'll probably be right. But who flies for 60 miles? We fly much further than that as a rule. And if your flight is 6,000 miles, you are profoundly lost. The airport and your destination is nowhere in sight. And you probably have no idea where you are. See, time deepens the consequences. It takes time for them to come, and when they come, they're deeper. The metaphor God gave us in the Bible about this is about seeds and planting and harvest, and time is part of how that works. Consider the story in Genesis chapter 5. The heroes of the faith are Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And this is the story in Genesis chapter 5 of Isaac and his family. It tells us in verse 20 that Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, and that he prayed to the Lord on behalf of her because she was childless. And then it says he was 60 years old when she gave birth to the 2 boys, the twins, Esau and Jacob. And verse 27 says the boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open field, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. And Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau. But Rebekah loved Jacob. And there was time in those events. There was 20 years between the wedding and the babies. Isaac planted a prayer and he harvested babies, and that was wonderful, but it took 20 years. And there was a whole childhood between the favoritism and the fighting. You see, time is a factor. You plant, and later you reap. You reap later. And the Bible also talks about a thing called reaping the whirlwind. Now, that comes out of Hosea chapter 8. God was talking through the prophet Hosea to the people of Israel, and he says this: Israel has rejected what is good. They set up kings without my consent. They choose princes without my approval. With their silver and gold, they make idols for themselves to their own destruction. Samaria, throw out your calf idol. My anger burns against them. How long will they be incapable of purity? They're from Israel. They sow the wind, and they reap the whirlwind. You see, they'd moved into the promised land, and there was a time of fighting, of boundaries, and then there was peace. And when there was peace, they looked at the countries around them, and the countries around them had small local gods. Gods were believed to be sort of geographic in their authority at that time. And they also had kings and princes, and Israel started to want to be like those countries around them. And perhaps it seemed very attractive to them, the idea of joining with the other gods and of having a king. Perhaps they thought it was just a small matter. Perhaps they thought it was just respectful to those other nations to permit their Asherah poles and their Baal worship. Perhaps it just seemed like getting along. But that choice had far more serious consequences than seemed likely at first, because there came a time for harvest. And the nation of Israel harvested a loss of spirituality. They harvested a broken kingship and a failure of their security under God, and a generation who did not know him. A much more severe harvest than they thought. And maybe Isaac thought, when those boys were little, it's just sort of natural for me to prefer one son. It's just a small matter. I just naturally get on with him better. I'm just free to do that, aren't I? That's not a big deal. But they sowed favouritism, and they reaped competition and hatred and lies and ultimately death threats, until Jacob ran away from home and the family was separated and broken. They sowed the wind and they reaped the whirlwind. And the fourth element I want to talk about is reaping life. And I write it in capital letters, and people here might remember I've talked about small L-I-F-E is our physical life, but capital L, capital I-F-E is the life that we have in Jesus. Is the life Jesus died to give us. And he said in Galatians, I've come that they may have life and have it abundantly. He's talking about our spiritual life. And the principle that we have about reaping and harvesting applies both positively and negatively. It applies to planting positive things as well as negative things. The full passage that we looked at in Galatians 6 says this: do not be deceived. God cannot be mocked. A man reaps what he sows. Whoever sows to please their flesh will from the flesh reap destruction. Whoever sows to please the Spirit will from the Spirit reap eternal life. Let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all people, especially to those who belong to the family of believers. I love that in church today we're talking about believers in other parts of the world who are persecuted for their faith. And Psalm 126 that we read says in verse 4, restore our fortunes, Lord, like those streams in the Negev. Those who sow with tears will reap with songs of joy. Those who go out weeping, carrying seed to sow, will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with them. James says those who sow peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Proverbs 11 says a wicked person earns deceptive wages, but one who sows righteousness reaps a sure reward. And there is the salvation exception. In my life, I do not deserve salvation. I do not deserve the forgiveness of my sins. I do not deserve brotherhood with Jesus, at a home with him. I do not deserve to live free of guilt. I do not deserve to live in a restored relationship with God. I did nothing to earn that. It was credited to my account. It's like being given a field that's thoroughly cleared and weeded. And we start fresh. And we get to choose what we plant there every day. And there will certainly be waiting. There will certainly be hard work. It won't be easy. There will probably be weeping. It will hurt. And then there will be harvest. A sure reward. About a year ago, the New South Wales government declared fireweed to be a weed of national significance. I thought any farmer in Boonah could have stood in their backyard and said the same thing. It cost them several $100,000 to make the declaration. Great, I thought. Yippee. However, the truth is that when they make a declaration about a thing like that, it comes with certain guarantees of investment and funding, and a certain guarantee that they'll do some work around it because it's a problem. They recognise it as a problem. So it wasn't only a declaration, but a guarantee that something would get done about the problem. I'm going to make a declaration. I don't make a declaration because I'm clever and I know stuff. I'm just declaring to you what the Bible declares to all men and has done for generations, what it said to people in the time of Jesus, in the time of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob, and what it says to us today. You will reap what you sow. And in our culture, under the umbrella words like freedom of choice and healthy exploration and be true to yourself, we are planting rubbish. And we should expect a harvest of slavery and instability and suffering. What should we do about that? Like with the declaration about fireweed, when you know that's true, it demands an investment of time and work, and that has implications nationally and locally and individually, and probably I should have put internationally up there, but certainly nationally. Pray. I love that when the prayer letters come out, Wayne includes prayers on a national level. Pray for the people who are making laws in our country. Pray for the people who make laws in some states where some state premiers make extraordinary laws. Pray for lawmakers. Pray for our leaders. Pray for this country that was once called the Great Southland of the Holy Spirit. Pray locally. Be prepared for a harvest. Let us nurture here in Boonah a community that's really informed, that's realistic about what the next generation will go through and be like, that we brim with the fruit of the Spirit, that's radical in the face of what their lives are like. Let us not be discouraged. Shirley, doing good to people who are having hard times, the grumpy men meeting in the park, these things matter. These things matter. This is where our church comes face to face with our community. These things matter. So love. Reap a community. Be prepared for people who are suffering and unstable, for whom life is difficult. Be equipped. Be filled with love, without which nothing we do is meaningful. Be that kind of a community in this place. And individually, stand in that fresh field and go and get your glasses if you need, and look back at the information about what you're planting and about how it grows. Make wise choices. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. You will reap what you sow. Do not think you can trick him or sidestep it. You will reap what you sow, even if no one else sees. What are weeds? With the help of God, Tear them out. And plant in your life the presence and the power of the Holy Spirit. Live free of the guilt. Live the salvation exception. Plant seeds of peace and of righteousness. Make the decision that there's going to be love in this home. If what we're saying here in church today seems true to you, if it rings a bell for you, do something. Maybe today. Talk to Pastor Craig or to anyone else in this community that you trust. Do one thing about one thing. Because you reap what you sow, and God is not mocked. I'm going to pray this prayer after we sing the last song. I'm going to pray Psalm 126 over me and you. And I'm going to ask God to restore our fortune, and I don't mean our money. I mean our spiritual health and life. I mean, like streams in the desert, like the Colson overflowing when we finally got rain, that those who sow with tears, that we will reap with songs of joy, that we might go out, and it might be hard and it might be difficult, but we will not be discouraged, and we will return with songs of joy, carrying sheaves with us. So I'm going to pray that prayer. And before we do that, we're going to sing a song. Could you put that up, because I'm not even sure what song it is.